Ladies and gentlemen, damas y caballeros, thank you for joining us for another episode of All the Angles, the Business of Padel podcast worldwide, powered by the Hexagon Cup. This week, our objective is to give you, our audience, a unique insight into the history of paddle courts, the current propositions on the market, and the future of courts and court building. I'm fortunate enough to be exploring this area with three experts in the field. First up, we've got Paul McCormick, who has spent since 2006 in sports sales in and around Alicante, around golf, gym equipment and the like, and has spent the last few years as Chief Commercial Officer of MejorSet Paddle Courts, who are the official court partner of FIP and Premier Padel. Joining him, we have Gareth Evans, an ex-rugby player, but someone who's been heavily involved in the sports, leisure and fitness industry since 2011. Recently, he was the Managing Director of UK Padel Courts and is now the founder of Padel Ventures out of the UK. And finally, I have Pier Francesco Iazeola, who is spent the last 35 years leading new sports, exhibitions, five-a-side football, esports, and other facility-related projects. And in the last 8 or so years, he's headed up WSB Sport, helping about 200 facility creators realize their vision. Thank you all for joining us. Before we get started, if you enjoy this episode or have benefited from previous ones, please like, share, subscribe. It really does help. So, without further ado, gentlemen, let's go right back to the very beginning. Let's talk about concrete courts. When I think about where courts started, how they look, I think of the classic courts that Agustin Tapia used to play at in Catamarca with these concrete walls where no one could see in, no one could see out. And these were kind of the original paddle grounds. I guess my question with the concrete courts is, where are those courts still prevalent and what purpose do they currently hold in paddle's story? Are they still being built? Do they still have a role to play? What are your thoughts on that before we get into the more contemporary models? Paul, do you want to start?
Sure, I'll go ahead. Well, I would say it's an interesting question, Alex, and certainly I'm based over in Spain, so I guess where we have more paddle courts than anywhere, I would suggest. So there certainly are still some of those original courts about. I very much doubt there are any new ones being built. There are very, very few. It's a bit of a throwback to the old days, that's for sure. So aesthetically, of course, people look back at them now and sort of wonder how on earth we all played on them back in the early days. But those of us who have done, it's exactly how it all started. There are still some sentimentalists out there who, will talk about the old days of paddle and the origins of it. So there's certainly a emotional connection to them. But realistically speaking, we've come a long way from what you've alluded to there in the concrete walls and even the next stage of development into where we're at now. So I think, we won't be going back in that direction. Mainly aesthetics, but also, of course, the playing aspect of those courts too has been massively enhanced. So for both those reasons, I think they're a thing of the past.
I think many knees and ankles are thankful that we have moved on from those concrete floors. I know for sure, and I used to play volleyball when we graduated to wooden bounce floors from concrete old leisure centres. It definitely made a big difference. So where we are now, we've got, as you mentioned, Paul, we're now in the glass and steel courts that most of us know and love, most of us are familiar with and play with. Do you have a sense of when those kind of first started appearing? And because they're the prevalent model now, how do they differentiate? What is the spectrum of offering in that glass and steel court product?
Yeah, sorry, just to continue that, I guess there has been an evolution there, so to speak. So there are still, even within our own, at MejorSet, within our own portfolio, we have different models, some with more steel than others, of course. So there is still an element of that in terms of the different court models available. But to answer your question, yeah, absolutely. We've come away from concrete walls into glass all around the court, as everybody has. The difference from an aesthetic point of view is the visibility, of course. It's uncomparable, so to speak, from both inside and outside the court. So aesthetically, it looks better, but of course it also plays a lot better in terms of the bounce of the ball and the consistency and all the rest. Concrete walls are concrete walls. Again, in Spain, we still have residential because it's so established over here in terms of player participation. Apart from commercial clubs, residential is a huge segment of the industry here in terms of most apartment blocks will have paddle courts. So again, those that were built 15 years, 20 years ago were built with the concrete courts that you're talking about, and some of them still exist. And when the budget isn't there to refurb into a more modern court, they just paint over it and go again. So, but anything that's new, modern, or simply has evolved over that time is definitely of the glass element. And again, that's an improvement in all aspects: the playing side of the sport, the aesthetical side, and the visibility.
Yeah, maybe we might see in the future. Who knows? I always have the tendency to see things from the player's perspective, And now some might look for a different experience playing paddle. So, wouldn't be surprised if some club would decide to build a proper concrete court, in the club, just to keep this vintage experience. But I mean, at the end of the day, squash courts are still built in concrete. There are a few glass courts with squash, but concrete is always the standard. Of course, the ball is much smaller, so you would not see the ball if you play only with glass under certain conditions. And also glass costs less than building a court in concrete nowadays. But I wouldn't be surprised if these concrete courts would maybe pop up in the future for some club just to give that vintage experience to their players.
And it's not that long ago that, there's that famous clip of, I think it was Paquito, who was running for a ball and smashed through the glass. So obviously things are still evolving, and we can obviously get a little bit technical here. Is there a range of quality in terms of the steel used and the glass used to create that premium model and to a more accessible model? It may not be visible to the naked eye, but is there that range that exists within the market for clubs that are looking for slightly different price points? Gareth, maybe you can jump in with your experience in the UK on that.
Maybe Paul's better placed to answer this, but certainly in glass terms, there's different thicknesses of glasses. So there's 10 mil and there's 12 mil. In the UK, I just see a lot of people going for 12 mil. We've certainly not sold a lot of 10. And Paul might be better placed just to answer the question on the steel. I'm sure we'll come on to later on the thickness and the more robustness of the courts and the hurricane courts and things like that.
Yeah, absolutely. Maybe just add that. Like any product, guys, absolutely. There are different elements in the quality for sure. Again, we might touch later on manufacturing. Spain has traditionally been the hub of paddle court manufacturing, but as the sport goes more global, there's now manufacturing popping up all over the world. So the question will revolve around how is the quality the same? But even within the traditional manufacturer, the older manufacturers, depending on what products they're using, whether it be, as Gareth alludes to there, the steel, the thickness, the paint on it, the galvanization, different elements, the glass, of course. So from our side, as we are positioned very much at the premium end of the market, I would most certainly say there are differences in quality out there. And unfortunately, that generally is found out through trial and error and through time. But you definitely need to be very careful with the different elements of the court you use to make sure that the quality is top and avoid things like the example you just alluded to, Alex. If that happens, that's bad for all of us.
And just to drill down a little bit deeper, so obviously you can bring a premium court into your facility if you're a club builder or a club brand. Or you can decide that you want to cut costs a little bit and try and see if you can get slightly cheaper propositions or types of product. What are the downsides of doing that? Where do you end up seeing that come back on you? Is it a case of maintenance? You need to maintain more? Is it that they need to be replaced more readily? What's the downside of going for the cheaper option?
Well, I mean, first of all, is the durability of the product during the years, because I mean, all cores seem the same when you install them. Then problems starts to rise after a couple of years. For example, cores that are engineered properly, when you install them, all the screws fall into the hole naturally. You know exactly when you have to put it down like a mechano. The cheaper cores, you have to drill your hole on the site when you install the core. That means that after 1 year, all that drilling creates rust, because of course you can use galvanized iron, you can galvanize or put a primer on your steel structures, but if you drill the structure on site, that drilling takes away any kind of protection. And I mean, nobody understands that, because when you install the core seems perfect. Then after a couple of years, you have problems. So this is something that naked eye cannot see, But I mean, the guarantee that comes along with an established company or fabricator should justify the price increase that the client pays.
Yeah, and I think that people are worried on pricing. It's much better to go with someone like MejorSet, a premium brand, because there's options on court. So you don't have to buy a super panoramic court, an ultra panoramic court with the glass all the way around. Start at the classic framed court and talk about that starting point, that price point.
Yeah, that's a very good point. I appreciate it, Gareth. There's definitely within the portfolio, there's different models. So if you shoot for the top, and we have models, one specific example for the Premier Padel Professional Tour, we designed a model for them, but that's at the very higher end of our price spectrum. So of course, people look at it, love it, and want it, but absolutely, as Gareth says too, it's not a necessity. If you're a commercial club and you want to start out, and there are budget restraints, there are other options, and certainly much more competitive. But again, I would pick up definitely that there's a lot of shitty quality out there, quite frankly. And that's ultimately, people are going to find that out very quickly, as Piero says, within a year or two. And that can be on the steel, it can be on the turf, it can be on the lights, all the different elements. So we take pride in being at that premium end of the market. So I suggest the lifespan of the product is probably indicative of what you install in the first place.
Yeah, but the problem here is that people buy the court at the end of their construction, club constructions. And I haven't seen in my 30 years of experience, nobody that didn't make mistake on their budget, construction budget. So when it comes to buying the courts, actually they're out of the budget. So they want to save money. So this is the reason why people at the end, they need to buy cheaper courts. So this is why this is all part of our sales strategy, of course. And we need to make understand for the good of the clients that planning is very important, and also budgeting wise, it's really very important, because otherwise you will end up with the necessity of buying cheap courts, which at the end of the day means poor quality for the clubs and for the players. And also for us, it's a disgrace.
And we've alluded to it now, but I think even in the last couple of years, I've seen conversations about new factories opening up in Mexico, USA, China. From your guys' point of view, is this good news or bad news for the sport worldwide that there is this diversification of source for the raw materials and for the construction elements?
I think yes and no, Alex. When I say yes, let me clarify. I think anything that is internationalizing the sport and the industry is good. So it's not completely dominated by one market or one country or one region even. So I think moving forwards, if we want to take this sport really truly global and all the aspirations of it becoming an Olympic sport and everything, then this is necessary. I would temper that, however, by saying the ideal scenario there would be that the premium and the quality manufacturers are those who actually expand into those markets and those countries and maybe do some of the manufacturing themselves there. Because right now, I can't speak for them all, but some of the manufacturers, let's take China as an example, nobody really knows who's making them. So there's certainly been and will continue to be issues around quality over there. But if the established manufacturers and other players in the industry end up internationalizing and expanding bigger and bigger all the time into those markets, and then can potentially take some of their manufacturing to other regions, then that's good, because it'll increase speed to market. And again, just in terms of the awareness of the sport, I think it will be beneficial for all of us.
Yeah, I would add something. We know that padel is a worldwide success. And there's been, in the last couple of years, a lot of pressure on the offer side. I mean, a shortage of products, demand increased for the courts. So this is why a lot of new manufacturers popped up. And also padel is perceived by most clients as a commodity product. So they don't see the difference between one product and another product. So as a commodity, I mean, it's perfectly natural, like in any product, that you see manufacturer and new fabricators everywhere. But the problem is that what the fabricator has to do to step out of this competition is to build a strong identity for their brand, of course, and also try to give to their cores different quality features that can increase the value of their product. For example, technology, for example, design. And they should think of something else, maybe Like the client can feel part of a community. I mean, the buyer of the court. Some perks for the buyers, for example, not because policy here, but I mean, MejorSet, for example, as a supplier to the Premier Padel, official supplier, they can give to their buyers access to these very important tournaments. There are some tournaments that are among the most and the best organized tournaments in any sport. I live in Rome, and I must say that I've seen the Premier Padel tournaments all over the world, and I must say that the tournament in Rome is something incredible for the location, for the level, the top level of the organizations. Being invited to the final for someone who owns a Premier Padel court might be a perk that could convince him to spend that 3 or 4 thousand pounds more for that kind of court. Don't forget that the cost of the paddle court itself is 25% of the total cost, because if you have to build a slab and you have to build a canopy, I mean, to have a proper court, indoor court, I would say, the cost of the paddle is 25%. So we're not talking about very big investment. And also built exclusive partnership or strategic partnership with other brands, like, for example, Padel Gallis did with Wilson, for example. That's not a bad idea at the end of the day, or add it also with another fabricator. Sometimes clients think that having these discounts that Adidas gives to buy their material when you buy their courts might be a perk that make them decide to buy those courts. So also something that is very important compared to previous question is the maintenance. For example, who does the maintenance of the paddle courts? Fabricators, sometimes they have their own installators, so maybe they should think about offering maintenance program included in the price. Now everybody knows, because most of the paddle operators are also themselves paddle players, so they play paddle, they see the condition in which some of the courts are after a couple of years, so that when they they open their own facility, they should be interested in a maintenance program, for example. Are all, in my opinion, ideas that could help some of the fabricators to step out of the competition. So Chinese, I mean, I've worked in Shanghai. I did a club for a very important football club in Shanghai, and we built the course there using Chinese fabricator, and they're very good. They're not bad. I mean, some of them are good, but their prices are not cheaper than ours. You know, you can find very good fabricator in China, but they're expensive.
And just in terms of the quality, is there any kind of independent third-party regulator that looks at the tier or the quality of these courts and objectively tiers them and says, right, this is a grade A court, this is a grade B court, this is a grade C court, based on the quality of the metal, the quality of the glass, the whatever it may be? Or is it still currently there isn't that level of regulation in place for the customer, in this case the clubs, to really hang their hat on and rely on?
Well, I suppose there's a code of practice. There's in the UK, SAPCA have got involved, the Sports and Play Association. So from the building side of things, but it's a recommendation,
Well,
not a sort of
some
regulation.
companies have ISO certifications, for example, so they have to respect some criteria, otherwise they lose their certification.
But it does also, and you're right, Gareth, it's in the UK, but it varies wildly across different markets too. So I think to answer your question, Alex, there's nothing consistent. So obviously, the more developed markets are a little stricter with their criteria and their requirements, whereas the emerging markets less so. It can even be customer specific, but certainly I would say it's market specific at the moment.
And you touched on the question for me of installation, which I didn't think about, but I think is actually quite important. You can have the best bit of kit, but if it's installed badly, then, I mean, you've got real problems. I've been to courts where the brand of the name of the court looks good, but it's bumpy on the turf, and the joints aren't quite where they should be in the glass. What's the relationship between the court builders and installers? And is it that court builders always say you've got to use our installation team, or you've got to use our recommended installation team in this market, or it's we've sold you the product, what screwdrivers you use and who you use to put that together, that's not our bag?
Well, I think in terms of what I've done with Padel Ventures is try to do a sort of turnkey approach where if somebody's doing outdoor courts, you use my groundworks teams and we look with our structural engineers properly at the ring beams and how the tarmac is laid so that the courts are going onto a quality surface. And when we're fitting them, then we've got the best fitters. There's only one person to blame then, and that's me. If anything goes wrong, and we are, unfortunately, we're a blame society, aren't we? So that's why I like to do everything myself.
Yeah, from our side, and maybe just add there, very similar. I agree totally. A turnkey solution, first of all, is what a customer will always prefer. Certainly, from a manufacturing side, I think the answer to your question, Alex, you're absolutely right. The quality of the court is one thing, but installation, and that includes a little bit what Gareth's alluding to, the prep, the pre-installation work, is of equal importance to the actual quality of the court. So that entire installation process, if it's not done correctly, something will go wrong very quickly. So for us, when you're positioning your brand as premium quality, that includes the whole installation, or what we call the service side of the business too. So one thing is actually making the court, but then it's delivering it and installing it correctly. So we do offer multiple options of doing that, but generally speaking, we have our own installation teams and we send them around, or we train installers in local markets to verify them, and then they're self-sufficient and can go on. Because speaking quite frankly, there's so much going on around the world on a global level at the moment. It's hard to be everywhere at once. So we do need, again, probably this is more relevant to the emerging markets, maybe Asia Pacific as an example, where we need them to get up to speed quite quickly on installing courts so that they can be self-sufficient, and we don't need to go physically each time to do that.
Let's talk a little bit about where, Piero, you touched on this, about the kind of the differentiations and the USPs that different court manufacturers can develop or can offer into the market. So let's talk a little bit about the different innovations that are happening in the court manufacturing space. So let's start off with these kind of extreme weather condition courts, and we can touch upon hurricane-proof courts. We can touch upon courts that can withstand either very high temperatures or very low temperatures, or indeed a range of temperatures. How important now is that to the reputation of paddle? Because there is nothing worse as a paddle player or as a court builder to have courts that just can't deal with the context or the geography or the climate that you are in. And we've gone beyond the one size fits all. So how important is it now that club brands consider these slightly more bespoke, slightly more niche products dependent on their geographies and climates?
Yeah, I was going to really comment from maybe quotations that we're getting out there around the UK and around seaside resorts. Anybody can give you a price on a court, but have they considered what it might be like, those conditions with the paint and what can be done and what the manufacturer is offering in terms of maybe like from a C3 to a C5 paint? Probably a comment that I get quite a lot in the UK, people looking at seaside.
Yeah, this happens in Italy. A lot of courts are on seasides. So, of course, when you do your planning, you have to understand that your court, if it's near the sea, needs an extra protection, of course. Then you have to deal with the winds first. So this is why new courts have been designed that can withstand stronger winds. I know that MejorSet has some, maybe others also have some, but of course, nobody is playing paddle under 100 kilometers per hour. So I don't think there is nobody around. So even if a court falls down, I don't think there's nobody there. But in any case, there are regulations. Sometimes these regulations are maybe too strict, like in Germany, for example. If you build paddle courts, like if you build a building, which is not actually, this regulation exists. So actually, you have to deal with that.
Yeah, I just pick up on that absolutely, Alex. I think it is important because you're right. The one size fits all is no longer applicable, and as more and more emerging markets develop and pop up, and this is now all four corners of the world. So I think, speaking quite honestly and humbly about it, I think a lot of manufacturers have learned a little bit as we've gone, the evolution of and the different markets we're going to. That means different climates. That means different needs for the courts. So we've developed, I speak for ourselves, but we developed a hurricane-proof court. Extreme is the name of the model. So it's very, very different in terms of aesthetically. It is a bit more of a throwback to lots and lots of steel because it needs to be to be more robust. But it's specifically for those kind of markets you're alluding to. Could be the Caribbean islands, could be Australia, New Zealand, could be Miami, Florida, those kind of areas where hurricanes or let's say extreme weather conditions are very prevalent. So yes, Piero's right. First of all, there's the requirements, and some are very strict on that and what's being allowed to be built. But outside of that is the customer understanding that these options exist now. So as I say, I think the manufacturers are reacting a little bit, and I include ourselves in that, to the needs of each market. But it's super important moving forwards. Yeah.
Of course, indoor courts also have their requirements, but basically indoor you can install any court provided there is a quality court. But I mean, you don't have the same restrictions that you have for outdoor courts. And also going back to the cost issue, a lot of people want cheap courts, so they don't care. So they buy any court. And this will go on for a certain number of years, because at the beginning, when you don't have many courts in a country, these courts earn a lot of money, of course, because people choose a court for necessity, because they don't find a court, so they want to play. But as long as the number of courts increases, then people will choose the court for the quality. And when this happens, of course, we will get our revenge. Anybody, I mean, us as consultants, Paul as fabricator, Gareth as installer, we wait. We are looking forward to it in order to be able to explain to people all the implication around building a paddle facility, which is not just buying the court. The court is the ingredient. It's not the full dish, as I say. No? So of course, if I want to build a proper facility, I also want a nice court, a quality court.
Okay. And what about temperatures? Does temperatures make a big difference? Can you put the same court up in Edinburgh as you put up in Riyadh, or do you need to again consider that there is material requirements that come from that climate?
Yeah, absolutely. You need to consider it, Alex. And you're right, it's not the same. You could put the same court up, but in terms of the treatment of the court, which the guys alluded to a little bit in the steel structure, the heat and the humidity, which is probably more important in those kind of climates. And again, Southeast Asia, it's an area I'm working quite a bit in at the moment. That's an issue, the humidity as much as the heat. So there's protective treatments, there's extra coats you can put on the structure, the primer treatment that Piero talked about. If it is, as the guy said, and this is global, doesn't have to be in a hot and humid climate, but if it is very close to the sea, that the saltpeter that comes off is going to have an effect. So that's important. But even other elements of the court, the turf too, certainly we would recommend monofilament turf for outdoor facilities in hot, humid climates. That can be extreme heat. It could also be extreme rain in cases too. Again, I think this is something that the paddle industry is learning as they go. 5-10 years ago, it wasn't really a thought that had to go through manufacturers' minds. The British climate or the Irish climate, what that actually means for the turf and the court. If it's not covered, if it's outdoors, of course. So those are all things I have to consider. It's not the same depending on location.
And another innovation that I've seen recently, and I think, Gareth, you're involved in this development, is the floating paddle court. So I saw a video about this about a year ago where Paulo Jose Maria and Ari Sanchez did a piece of content on a floating court. Then I saw Ultra recently announced that they're putting 4 courts up in the sea or in the waterways around Miami. Is this a fad, or is there like a genuine need that this is meeting? Where is that the solution?
Well, yes, I am involved in it quite a bit. Actually, I'm just involved in planning my own floating club in the UK at the moment, which is quite exciting. And we should open that towards sort of summer or late summer next year. It's activating water space, really, where everybody's looking for land and those options globally around this, that actually you can look at docksides, marinas, lakes, even reservoirs. A bit more difficult on the sea because of the tides, as you can imagine. But I think, why not? It's entertainment for somebody. You could get a lot of wet balls, but the way that I've looked at it, coming in with my operator's hat on, is that I've seen what the rent and the rates are doing around the UK and the cost of build, where not a lot of people are looking at activating the water space, and I am. So I think that is quite an exciting, it's a challenging one, and build costs aren't much more than on land. But certainly the rent and the the leases can be much more favourable.
Is the regulation different at all?
No, you have to converse over here with the canal and river trusts and the waterways, but it's just the same. You go down the planning permission route, and it's the same hurdles as we get with planning permission on land.
So I'm seeing your empire, Gareth, in Amsterdam, in Venice, in St. Petersburg. I'm seeing it all now.
Well, I'm in Amsterdam in 2 weeks' time. Yeah, I've got some interesting conversations coming up. Yeah.
Manchester, of course, is full of canals, and so there's ample opportunities.
Well, it's just full of rain, actually. Yeah.
That's a separate issue. Sorry, Paul, you were going to jump.
I was going to add, it's an interesting one because I like the way Gareth's explained. I hadn't really thought of it that way in terms of activating water space. I would have answered your question. I'd say, I don't know if it's a gimmick or a fad, but I'd certainly say that it adds to the, a lot of these sort of iconic or different venues add to the buzz around paddle. And so I don't think that's bad for any of us. Okay, that's floating, but rooftop paddle courts we've just done some in Jakarta in Indonesia. Anything that is a little bit different and you can pitch as I don't know if iconic's the right word, but certainly a flagship site on a different kind of environment is good. We've all still got to understand that most people, unfortunately, still don't really know a lot about paddle, regardless of the market. I'm talking on an international level here. So anything that generates buzz and awareness of the sport is good for all of us. So I think it's a very interesting angle.
And we haven't really touched on turf and lights. Is there much changing in that area? I think, actually, Paul, you did mention the turf, depending on weather conditions. But is there any other innovations in those two areas beyond the steel and the concrete and the glass? Where else are we seeing innovation? I think I saw a court at one point which had the ball holder in the net post. But what else are we seeing in terms of the next frontier of courts and court manufacture?
Yeah, from our side, I think Piero said it at the start. Courts, generally speaking, look quite similar to most people when you put them in. So there is obviously a lot behind the scenes in terms of design and innovation. You're always trying to tweak things to stay ahead of the game and ultimately stay ahead of competitors. So I guess an example for us would be with the Premier paddle model that we alluded to earlier. That has a new innovation, what we call our shock lock, which is a anti-vibration spring on the exterior of the court. So that's been really well received. It's quite a subtle addition to the court, but it's been very well received as something brand new and an innovation. First of all, it's important from the technical side of it and player protection and whatnot in terms of absorbing their vibrations. But I think what you'll find is it is quite subtle additions or changes in things that manufacturers are looking at because it's hard to reinvent the whole court all at once. You can do that, for example, going back to the extreme weather condition courts, but as soon as you start doing that, you're going into a completely different price point. So that then has to be accepted by the market. So it's more likely to be smaller, subtle changes that can differentiate one court or one brand from another.
I don't know whether Piero might be able to touch on this because there's an Italian company that have launched a sandless turf. So as we all know, monofilament or texturized turf requires sand for playability. But I'm not played on this particular turf, so that was quite interesting to see in the last week or two.
No, I don't know anything about that. You know the name of the company?
Yeah, the company, you'll know NX Paddle. So they've done a lot around the fiberglass courts. They've now launched a sandless turf.
Okay. I know others that launched different kind of surface in the resins.
What about the fence? Because traditionally, the fence has been the classic fence, which is very three-dimensional, and that's part of the fun, hitting your rouleau into the fence and no one knowing how it's going to bounce. But is there... I think I saw a model of a court where they were basically saying we are going to be addressing that by trying to make it less three-dimensional and making it more two-dimensional. So actually the fence almost becomes two-dimensional, and that makes it more predictable, which makes it less fun. Surely no one's asking for the fence to become more predictable, are they?
Not to us anyway. No, I guess it depends whether you win the point or not, but I think your point is right. That's part of the game, and I think that the purists enjoy that aspect. It works both ways, right? But certainly something that I think is traditional and will continue.
I've always wanted to ask to those who manage and run the federation why they allow in paddle the second serve. which in my opinion is completely useless. Because you cannot miss a serve in paddle. In ping pong or in volleyball, you don't have the second serve. You have it in tennis, I understand why, but I mean, why it exists in paddle? Somebody knows? Maybe Paul knows?
No, I don't know. I'm not the best person to be asking about playing paddle, if you saw my level, but all I know is, Piero, I miss a lot of first serves, so I probably...
I was going to say, I could do with a third, frankly, sometimes. Well, I was going to ask about the lights, actually, because I was watching Arturo Coelho practicing. I think it was in Madrid last year. And I noticed that he was practicing his X3s, and he was working on the assumption that X3s are becoming actually increasingly a vulnerability, right? Because they come up with a lot of topspin, so they come up quite high. They give the person who runs out of the court quite a lot of time, and you're suddenly on the defensive. And so he was... First of all, he was working a lot on trying to kick it really wide because he's left-handed. He really wanted it, when it kicks out, to really kick out wide to close the angle down for the person who's trying to get the ball back in the court. But the other thing I noticed him doing, he was aiming for the light. So he was aiming that his kick would kick into the light fixture because he realized that if it hits the light fixture, it's dead. It doesn't matter what else happens, it's dead. And so I wonder what the light manufacturers and the light location is now going to think about this if suddenly this becomes a fad. I mean, it feels pretty out there and it feels pretty niche, but these players are doing things that was unthinkable 5-10 years ago in terms of technical ability. So if Arturo is starting to hone his ability to hit light fixtures, then I think we might need to think about how we deal with lighting around these courts now.
Maybe they'll have to introduce a LED if all the players start doing that.
Absolutely. I think your point's right, though, Alex. The players are evolving so quickly what they're doing now. So any manufacturer, whether it's the court, the turf, the light, they have to look at that and make sure that they're adapting to that. So especially if, I wouldn't call it a deficiency in the product. I don't think it's that. But if an element of the product can be exploited by the players or whatever, they have to look at it. Again, I think with all elements of the court, there are certainly higher quality lighting than others. We work with different suppliers ourselves. So again, more in the premium end of that market. So they're the experts to talk about the actual why their lights are premium, the displacement of the light in the court and the lack of glare and all those sort of things. But if anybody's going to exploit that, it's the elite players, I guess. So it's something to keep an eye on.
And what about noise? In a few places, planning permission issues and regulatory issues have really hung their hat on noise. And the noise of the ball being pinged off the glass when you're hitting it off the back wall. That noise has become a nuisance, quote unquote, that has hindered planning permission processes. Has there been any development to try? I know rackets, they've tried to develop rackets that are quieter. And I know pickleball obviously has its own issues with sound. But has there been development in trying to decrease the noise that courts themselves generate?
Not really, not yet, Alex. No, it's just simply on the basis that I do take your point, but we don't hear it often enough. Certainly, occasionally, but I think so if you look at the US market, as you alluded to there with pickleball, paddle is lucky in that sense. The pickleball is much worse in terms of noise pollution. So paddle's viewed as better in that regard. And then within Europe, again, I can speak about Spain, where it's much more developed. We have 15, 16,000 courts here. Most residential apartment blocks have them, and yeah, they make noise, but it's not a consideration of disruption that we have to think about regularly. So not yet, but I guess like anything, if it becomes more and more prevalent as a problem, we'll have to look at it.
It's actually the noise off the bat is louder, isn't it, than the glass, in my opinion, when you're playing. The glass isn't as loud. But going back to planning, every paddle club that I've been involved with or court, there's always a noise survey in the UK.
I've seen, visiting clubs, I've seen that they now have the habit of putting music, which is nice. If you choose the right music, I think should be an element of any club. There is music in the clubs, and it helps a lot.
Agreed.
Metallica or
drum and bass. Yeah.
Yes.
So we talked a little bit, we started the conversation about concrete courts. We talked a little bit about costs. It made me think about the fact that as paddle grows in new markets, there are a lot of premium club offerings, and that's somewhat based on the heavy capital investment up front. Does the market have a concern or even a product that addresses that concern that can drive court build costs right down for greater community courts, accessible courts, cheaper builds, to try and create a broader market that isn't so top heavy in these newer markets. We look at the US, we look at the UK, we look at Sweden, we look at even Southeast Asia to some degree. There's a lot of these facilities are quite premium, and I know it's not all down to the courts, because the courts are not the only cost. But is there a sense of, while we can't go back to the good old days of the concrete court, is there a way of going, right, we need to create a much cheaper configuration of materials that will allow court builders to create more accessible courts?
I don't think it's an issue. Concrete courts are much more expensive than glass courts, first of all. And secondly, the costs are at minimum. And third, and most important, the cost of the court is just a small part of the cost of the entire development. So it shouldn't be an issue, in my opinion. We should invest in safer courts, in maybe more technological courts. This I agree. Or maybe different kind of surfaces. Why we should play just on grass, for example, like in tennis, we could have different places. I mean, I don't think that cost is an issue. People can buy cheap courts in China now for $10,000. You can buy a court if you want. I mean, good luck, but you can do that. I don't think it's an issue, honestly, the price of the court. I don't know, Paul.
Again, I think it's probably important to say our positioning is, again, at the premium end, that a lot of those clubs you're alluding to, Alex, that's a segment that we've strategically identified and want to work with. So that's the end of the market that we are mainly involved in. But you're right. We also don't want to disregard, I think you talked about maybe more community-based facilities, things like that. So I think, as Gareth said at the start, if you just focus in on the panoramic model, then that's where price and budget and things come up a lot. But we do still have the traditional model, the classic, we call it our V-Pro classic model. So most manufacturers still have that as an option, and that's significantly more cost effective than the full panoramic models. As Piero says, costs are at a minimum as they are. But again, within each portfolio, there will be options. So not everybody absolutely needs to or does buy the top model, let's say the full panoramic.
And as far as club developers are concerned, I would say that what is important, in my opinion, is the concept behind the facility. People will buy places, they don't buy product anymore. So as I said before, now in many countries, they choose a paddle court because they want to play and there are no courts. But in time, in 2-3 years, even in England, maybe in 3-4 years, people would choose quality and they will choose a paddle club like they choose a restaurant, So you need a branded concept behind. And courts can be part of this concept. If I want to eat something fast and cheap, I go to the very cheap restaurant and I have my paper tablecloth and I have my chair, or I eat standing up. No? But if I want to spend an evening with my friends and I want to live an experience, I go to my favorite club. Like I would, if I have to invite people to a restaurant, I choose a good restaurant. If I want to invite people to a paddle club, I would choose a good paddle club. And the course will be part of this equation, in my view. But you still need a concept. Otherwise, you will become a provider of services while you should be a destination. Because if you are a destination, you can keep your price level high. If you are a provider of services, in Barcelona, I can play padel for €2 per person. In my club in Vilanova, La Geltrud, I play for €2 per person. It's a community court. This is why the courts are always part of the equation of the club.
And this may sound a bit of a strange question, but is there an optimum number of courts at a club or a range?
Well, to become a club, you need more than a couple of courts to have that club environment. In my opinion, I'd say anything from 3+, you start to become a club and create that social environment, as Piero touched on, and build that sort of community and that club feel. And again, in my opinion, the more successful people that are doing this as operators, it's not just about the paddle court, it's about everything else around the paddle and what people are doing.
I'm sure you install a court on the top of a skyscraper, maybe you can price that $400 per match. Maybe one court is enough. It depends where you put the court. Otherwise, maybe you might need 30 courts to do a profitable club. It depends what your concept is.
It's the same as golf. I can go and play golf at Manchester Municipal. It might cost me £10, but then I can go to Barbados and play on the Green Monkey, and it costs me $4,000 per round. So, yeah. I don't do that much.
Looks like your business is doing very, very well, Gareth.
Absolutely. I just agree with the guys there. We're manufacturers, so it's a hard question to answer, but certainly from experience, the clubs that have been more successful, I think 3 to 4 is we'd love every club to have 6, 8, 10 courts, of course, but 3 to 4 is a pretty consistent number. But I absolutely agree with Gareth's point that outside of the court, if they have a food and beverage element or other revenue streams that will add to things, then all the better for that. Because if there's one thing I can speak from experience, having lived 20 years in Spain and having watched the evolution of paddle in 20 years, yes, it's a fantastic sport. And yes, the facilities are generally speaking very good. The weather's great, generally speaking. But it's as we all know, it's the social aspect, why paddle has triumphed so much and that community vibe. So you need to have a facility that accommodates that. And that'll ultimately help with additional revenue streams for sure for your club, but also the repetition factor of people coming back and getting addicted to the sport and continuing to play.
Yeah, good words to finish our episode on, because that pretty much wraps it up. Again, please like, share and subscribe if the content was thought-provoking. Please comment on LinkedIn or Twitter if you have any recommendations around our format, topics we should devote an episode to, questions we should ask people we need to bring on. We want you all, those driving the next phase of this industry's future, to tell us what you want to hear about and who from. Thank you, Paul, Gareth, and Pier Francesco for joining us today. Yeah. We will keep doing our best to cover all the angles of the business around paddle, episode after episode. Until the next one.